You know how pressure turns coal into diamonds? Well, stress is just what people need to finally reach diamond rank in competitive Overwatch. In all seriousness though, these are pretty stressful times we're living in. Many are under quarantine and virtually all physical sporting events are cancelled. However, this paves the way for virtual sporting events to finally thrive like we always knew they would. In this video, TheGamer is diving into how professional sports are turning to their digital counterparts, and what that means for the future of esports. Let's go! The threat and impact of the current global situation started to feel real to most people right around the time major sports leagues were cancelled. Not only were these major organizations acknowledging and taking action to combat the virus, but people's daily lives were uprooted practically overnight. Even if someone wasn't the biggest sports fan, it was jarring to suddenly not have them happening in the background of everyday life. While most leagues weren't sure how to adapt to these bizarre circumstances at first, after a while, many of them brought their competitions online. Instead of having players and fans gather in large and dangerous groups, many of these events are now done remotely and viewed online. Perhaps the best example of this is how the Formula 1 Racing League rapidly switched to a series of online races to complete its current season. To do this, Formula 1 drivers were hooked up with gaming PCs and driving peripherals. Then, using a copy of the F1 2009 game, races were set up to match all of the cancelled races. Then, things got really fun, and these virtual races were opened up so that non-drivers could participate. These new competitors mostly included celebrities and big names in the F1 racing world, but these restrictions could be further loosened in time. Of course, a few other alterations were made to the game to make it a bit more approachable to drivers and fans. Damage settings were reduced by half for the vehicles, and all the cars ran the same specifications. Drivers also had the opportunity to turn on the anti-lock brakes and traction control features for those less experienced in virtual driving. Beyond this, though, races were more or less run like a typical Grand Prix. There were a series of qualifiers where competitors were funneled down by their best lap speed. The race proper took place on the secure track at half its length and consisted of 28 laps. There weren't any safety cars deployed though, but for most F1 players, that's pretty par for the course, for some reason. While this event and those in the future are strictly for entertainment purposes, by all accounts, it was a tremendous success. The video of this virtual Grand Prix got about 1.7 million views on the official Formula 1 YouTube alone. While we at TheGamer can say from experience that viewership on these kinds of events tapers off after a while, they could easily average 1 million views a pop in the long run. These numbers are about as high as the actual races and clearly stirred up more good press than a typical race. Now, obviously there were some pretty big differences between this event and a real-life Formula 1 race. For one thing, while F1 2019 is a great game and maybe the best Formula 1 sim, it's a far cry from the real thing. It's a totally different experience driving a virtual car, and as such, the races feel like there are fewer stakes. Wrecking an actual car is a matter of life and death in the real world, but in the game it's only bad enough to bring out the safety car half the time. Drivers aren't really competing for fame and fortune here either. Instead, the whole event had a more charitable feel to it. Like everyone involved was doing it to keep the wheels on the organization and distract the audience from their increasing anxiety-riddled reality. While the pixelated races certainly succeeded in that regard, there's definitely an air of them only going on for as long as they need to. Once drivers and fans are able to safely congregate again, the virtual races will stop and traditional Formula 1 racing will resume. Right? Maybe, but estimates currently place things at returning to normal in anywhere from another 3 weeks to a year and a half. Yeah, that mind-boggling amount of time is easily long enough for a dedicated virtual Formula 1 racing fandom to emerge. Basically, as people begin to connect with this esport in new and interesting ways, there's a good chance that they'd want it to stick around. Even when the traditional sport returns, folks may still want the esport equivalent, and we're already seeing that happen to other competitions. While Formula 1 seems the most committed and most suited to a shift to online competition, other sports are getting in on the trend too. For instance, NASCAR set up the NASCAR Pro Invitational iRacing Series as soon as its season was suspended. Just like the virtual Formula 1 League, this league follows the same schedule as the cancelled NASCAR Pro Cup. Drivers also use as realistic a setup as possible to compete, just like in the F1 Virtual League. However, the iRacing game is much more graphically limited than its F1 counterpart, so races are a bit harder to watch and it's quite a bit harder to suspend your disbelief. Also, NASCAR is treating this competition as more of a marketing and money-making opportunity than any kind of replacement for the actual season. Anyone who can run the game can compete in it, and it's as front-loaded with ads as anything under the NASCAR brand. It really is a shame that NASCAR more or less peaked with Will Ferrell's Talladega Nights movie. Ugh. The NBA, NHL, and professional soccer, or football leagues if you're cool with that, are warming up to this migration as well. NBA teams like the Phoenix Suns have already started doing things like finishing up their season in the NBA 2K20 game. The NBA 2K games have long been hailed as the best basketball sims around, and it's great to see them used in such a way. While the NBA 2K20 Esports League was also suspended because of the current situation, it's nice to see that NBA teams and players are still finding ways to entertain us. Nobody even had to make an embarrassing Instagram post this time either. The NHL is faring a bit more poorly in getting a virtual league up and running. The NHL 2K20 game is a bit less robust than its NBA counterpart. The NHL 2K games aren't super in-depth simulations, and chance seems to play a bigger role in the outcome of the games. Still, it's fun that the league is putting in the effort. It also turns out that behind all those microtransactions, the FIFA games are actually pretty good soccer sims. So much so that fans are turning to the game to get their soccer fix now that the season is on hiatus. Once again, this is a far cry from the real thing, but it's about as good as anyone could hope for right now. It's great that video games are able to fill in the gaps left by these cultural touchstones crumbling away for a while. It's been clear for a while now that games can fill the same unifying role in society that sports do. And now we get to see it on a bigger level than ever before. Even as just a stopgap, that's a big step forward for gaming, and this momentum is likely to carry on, even once everything eventually settles down. Video games are now rapidly becoming a cornerstone for mainstream culture during quarantine, and that presence is likely to stick. Or at the very least, video games won't be thought of as secondary to other forms of entertainment once all this blows over. Does that mean that esports are well on their way to usurping physical sports and becoming an almost all-encompassing entertainment phenomenon? Well, not exactly. There's a lot standing in the way of that happening. While it's undeniable that the world of esports is growing rapidly and is now bigger than ever, it's not going to get as big as other sports anytime soon. For one thing, there just isn't as much money in esports right now as there are in major sporting leagues. An average Overwatch player in Blizzard's official Overwatch League makes a minimum of $50,000 a year. That's pretty good and more than enough for a person to live comfortably in most parts of the world. By comparison, the NFL has a minimum player salary of $495,000 a year. A first-year NFL player is making nearly 10 times more money in a season than a starting professional Overwatch player. People aren't going to dedicate their lives to esports the same way they do to physical sports if they can only make as much as a once-promoted office worker. While there might be a lot of passion in esports, that can only go so far without a paycheck to back it up. Of course, it's also worth noting that esports leagues have also been hit pretty hard by the current global situation. The biggest esports leagues were also suspended because of the virus, and most of them have had a hard time picking them up remotely. That might seem fairly strange considering that most people play online games remotely to start, but there's actually a good reason for this. You see, just like other professional sporting events, e-leagues make a good chunk of their revenue from ticket sales to their events. So even if the leagues did start back up again, the organizing bodies might not be making enough to even pay the players their salaries. That's not a great situation, and because most of these leagues are so young, it means that they might be at risk of ending completely if they can't figure out their funding. Of course, esports competitions have a number of their own inherent problems as well. They can be rife with internet drama and harassment, which has caused numerous careers to tank and generated a lot of bad blood between players and teams. Players also aren't always the most professional either. Hygiene concerns have long been an issue in the competitive Smash Bros. Scene. And speaking of hygiene, wash your hands, everybody. Stay safe out there. Anyway, another major issue is that most popular esports don't have a direct parallel to physical sports. While the Madden and 2K games are very popular, they don't come anywhere close to the competitive scenes of Dota, League of Legends, or Rocket League. Sure, Rocket League is basically soccer with cars, but even that is a pretty high concept for non-gamers to wrap their head around or take seriously. In spite of all these issues, esports are growing in popularity. In time, it's more than likely that bigger sponsorships will lead to more money in leagues and generate a bigger player pool. As this happens, it also seems likely that players will grow up with esports and take their professions a bit more seriously. By the time all this happens, hopefully esports is big enough that it doesn't really matter if it's mainstream or not. Money and viewership numbers talk, and if those numbers match older sports leagues, it means that esports will be staying in the spotlight for quite some time. It's clear that esports are now on the upswing, which means the only thing we need to do now is continue to support our favorite players and teams. And now that we know esports will be around for a while, are there any that you want to try to break into? Please let us know in the comments down below. And while you're there, also please be sure to like this video, subscribe for more, and ring that little bell to support The Gamer and all your upcoming videos. From the bottom of our hearts, thanks a lot for watching.